I'm actually very curious. Do you truly believe in socialism? If so, could you give me a time when it was successful or currently successful? Well, I do believe in a form of socialism, and that form is specifically democratic. But yeah, I'm denial, bro. I support like democracy as a core principle. I think democracy is good if we're going to be organizing amongst ourselves, right? And so I believe in democracy as a form of rule. I believe in socialism insofar as I believe that workers should run their own workplaces. And we actually have those structures here right now in the United States. They're called democratic worker co-ops. So my entire deal as like a first step towards a better world would be creating a system that transitions companies, privately owned companies, towards a democratic ownership model, specifically democratic worker co-ops. I don't want the state running businesses necessarily in the vast majority of cases, but I do want the people who work at the business to collectively own the business and decide which direction to take its affairs. And so, like, what I'm talking about is setting up a set of systems and policies that transition our economy from one that is predominantly owned by capitalists to one owned by workers. And you can do that with structures that we already have and that have been studied and found to be more economically resilient, more productive, happier workers with more agency, that are more transparent and less prone to like being moved overseas. And so I think that a lot of what we are looking at in terms of transition to like a socialist state is one where we hold on tightly and dearly to our democratic values while ensuring that we have a transition that benefits the people who do labor in this country, the people who actually work for a living, the people who actually take the risks. And it seems to me that like that is more desirable for the vast majority of people in this country who aren't billionaires. And like, I don't know. You can call it whatever you want. I just think an economy predominantly predicated on, one worker, one vote when it comes to how decisions are made within the company is better, Honestly, you can reform the economy in that particular way by modifying a single document. The corporate charter can be reformed to pass ownership directly to workers. Exactly, Penny Ante. Like, I think there are a lot of pretty simple changes we could make to a lot of laws that could get us to what I'm proposing as like a first step. And like any kind of journey to a better place, it's going to consist of many other steps. And what those steps might be, you don't know, in advance, but we can at least take the first one in a tried and true direction. The state should provide services whenever a market is either a natural monopoly or a monopsony. When that's not the case, then have democratic worker co-ops. Yeah, I think when it is necessary to ensure like operations in a consistent manner, like 24/7 for like, I don't know, food, water, etc., it might make sense for the government to come in and like publicly own and operate that. To get massive social democratic transformation of the workplace, you need Marshall Plan level of re-education of America. I don't even know that you need. I do think that getting the public support behind a set of policy proposals like that would require a massive amount of organizing. But I think we can do it without even like a massive, I don't know, like a massive re-education of the population, right? Like when you had company towns where everything in the town was owned and operated by the company, and like the only materials available to you were that provided by the company, even people in those areas wound up figuring out, hey, wait a minute, I'm being screwed over. And hey, the way to get not screwed over is by working together to maximize our bargaining power in some kind of union. Like, people have figured this out even without in-depth training or knowledge of theory. And I think that we can, in fact, create a movement that is able to grasp the fundamentals of this. I reject the idea that, like, you know, average Americans can't understand oligarchy. Yeah, also, that's a really good point, Harold. The indoctrination is in the direction of government ownership, not worker ownership. Because, yeah, it's really easy to imagine some pencil-necked nerd in the government mishandling your company or your workplace. But it's a lot harder for you to imagine, you know, Jeff, the forklift operator, you know, doing the same thing. You know, you know Jeff. He's been to Christmas with you and the girls. He's a pretty reliable and solid dude. I think there just needs to be like a not a reliance or an insistence, but like you can win over normal working class people. I don't think we need to like break them of their indoctrination. I think there just needs to be, you know, a material push behind them finding common cause with others in their community. You know? Does that make sense? I think so. Here's an extremely good argument for unionization from personal experience. Think of the highest raise that you've ever gotten in a job in which you're paid hourly. Our union just won us a $3 wage increase for every person we negotiate on behalf of, whether they're in the union or not. Fuck yeah, Ranthier. How do I feel about decommodified housing? I think that should be like our goal, yeah. How are we any different from the oligarchs? Replace one elite for another? Well, I don't think replacing, like, billionaires with your coworkers is creating a new class of elites. How are we going to be any different? How are we any different from the oligarchs? If we control the working people by pushing them? What are you talking about? I'm not talking about pushing them. I'm talking about talking to them. And when you're saying, like, you're going to control the working people by pushing them, I'm saying, like, yeah, you talk with your coworkers. I'm sorry, is one coworker talking with another coworker the same kind of control that a billionaire who owns, like, multiple news outlets on a national scale and, like, 80% of the television stations? Is that the same? Because I don't think so. Do you think everyone is capable of the same level of comprehension? More or less. Jack, you don't understand. I will immediately own all things if you talk to me even once. Oh no. We found the chat genie. I think Marxist USSR is way worse than capitalist USA. I don't think you understand how the USSR worked. If you're describing the USSR as Marxist, I'm not entirely sure that you understood how the USSR operated there. They nationalized their resources. Yeah, just quick thought experiment here. What is communist? What does communism consist of? Just out of curiosity, what are like the three main components of communism, just as laid out by Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto? If you're gonna throw around the word Marxism, what does it mean when they were? What were the three pillars they put out there? Just out of curiosity. You know, most conservatives fail this challenge. It's true. Femboys, vodka, and Russian accents. God, that'd be so cool if it was true. An ideology we can all get behind. Group ownership of the means of production. Nope, that is incorrect, Alan Shepard. Peace, land, and bread. Nope. Philosophy, political economy, and scientific socialism. No, actually. Wrong. God. A stateless, classless, moneyless society. Stateless, classless, moneyless society. Was the USSR that? Was the USSR a stateless, classless, and moneyless society? No! No, it wasn't! Now, I'm gonna ask, like, when Marx is talking about classless society, or like a society in which capital ownership moves from capital owners capitalists, people who own capital, to the working class. Was that the case in the USSR? Did the workers own their workplaces in the USSR? No, they didn't. They did not, in fact, own their workplaces. So my argument here is that, by and large, nationalizing industries is not socialism. That is not a socialist idea. That is not a workers are owning the means of production situation. That is the state owning the means of production. You have replaced a board of directors for a company with the elected or appointed officials of the state. These are two very different situations from the workers who work in the workplace, in the factory, owning it. That is very different from the capital owner owning it. That is very different from the state owning it. Okay, so we got, we don't have, like, the most... Did the USSR have money? I'm a little fuzzy. Did the USSR have money? Did they have money? Yes, they had money! So, if Marxism is a stateless, or communism, of that, Karl Marx espoused, is a stateless, classless, moneyless society, and the USSR was none of those three things, then it was clearly not that. When you start throwing around like, oh yeah, Marxist USSR, you're kind of showing your whole ass. You don't know what you're talking about. Now, you can disagree that a stateless, classless, moneyless society is impossible to achieve. But then why hide behind lies? Why hide behind misrepresentations? That's what gets me, right? That's what gets me. Like, if your position is simply that socialism can never be achieved, and that, like, oh, well, it's just impossible, then why not just say with accuracy what you believe, as opposed to going off into La La Land and making, like, inaccurate associations? That's crazy. Do you advocate for socialism or communism? To be honest, they are relatively interchangeable concepts. They were used interchangeably at the creation of communism. I just, for the sake of brevity, I call myself a socialist. I think it summarizes me quite well, my political ideas. In a perfect world where humans are perfect and sharing, then yes, Marx's worldview works. Well, actually, workers can collectively own and operate their workplaces right now. It's not an abstract idea that relies on human beings being perfect. Like, we have democratic worker co-ops in the United States. Like, it's not... That's the thing that boggles my mind. People act like, oh yeah, if human beings were perfect, we could make socialism work. But like, humans will never be perfect, so we could never get it to work. That, again, the same thing, people said the same thing about, like, democracy versus, like, feudal lords. People said the same thing about monarchs that you're saying about capital owners. It's weird. Giving all your freedom to daddy government doesn't lead to the best of things. I agree. Which is why, this is what boggles my mind. You heard me talk about this already. Are you just incapable of, like, hearing my words? Like, when I talk about being pro-democracy, that necessitates me being anti-authoritarian. The entire premise of workers owning their own workplaces isn't nationalizing the workplace. That's actually one of the not great outcomes that must be undertaken out of necessity for certain things that are necessary for, like, your local society to run. Like, for example, water treatment facilities. Okay? And the thing that gets me is, like, if we already have these democratic structures all over the United States, and they already work, and they were already, like, proven, they already have longevity in their local communities, why so much opposition to just more of those? I don't get it. Like, I'm not, like, the people who work at democratic worker co-ops haven't, like, perfected their souls. They're still flawed individuals. Like, it's bizarre.
It's sad how many people saw the evils of authoritarian communism and thought the solution was authoritarian capitalism.
Yeah, I don't understand the impulse to look at capitalism and say, this is a good system. This system where, you have rejected as a nation the rule of kings, we should instead have millions of little kings. Have a million little kings that run your businesses and own the product of your labor. This seems to me deeply silly. I don't know.
Fun fact, in Arizona, most power companies are worker co-ops because they work better, and if you're without power in Arizona, everybody dies.
It's true. Thank you for the $5 super chat, Pluvius, and the insight into Arizona's power grid. Let's see. Worker co-ops are proof of concept. Exactly. I just think that it should be, like, they should be, like, made the predominant mode of economic production in our country. That, like, I feel like for some reason when I say it like that, like, oh, we already have this type of company, let's have more of those companies, that for some reason sounds a lot more approachable to a lot more people in our context than, like, just about anything else I can say. I do struggle when it comes to markets versus economic planning. I mean, I don't think markets are perfect vehicles for distributing resources, but they are one vehicle for that. So democracy, can it actually work? Yes. Where would you get the startup capital for a new worker co-op? Excellent question. Because I was thinking about this for a long time, and I think the best avenue for startup capital for worker co-ops is the government. Like, I think that in terms of what the government is incentivized to give out loans to, democratic worker co-ops are like the number one thing the government should be interested in funding. Like, I'm sorry, if you have a democratic worker co-op car factory, right? That car factory isn't going to pack up and move overseas because it's owned by the people who work there. They're not going to vote to offshore their own jobs. Like, the worker, like, they're gonna build their roots there. They're gonna live and die in that town. They're gonna have better rights within that company. And so, like, on top of that, because they're more transparent, they're gonna pay their taxes. They're not gonna, like, offshore all that money in the Cayman Islands somewhere. They're gonna keep it local. They're gonna spend it local. Okay? And then on top of that, if you need a vehicle and you, like, well, maybe the big banks would stop the loan program from going out or skim too much off of it. That's why I talk all the time about bringing back postal banking. I think that, like, we should, and this is, like, my personal belief here, I think we need to bring back postal banking. We had it until the 1960s. We got rid of it. And basically what it did was it turned every single, like, post office in America into a place you could do banking from. And that made banking accessible to every single, like, person in this country. It also meant that, like, hey, every single area of this country is covered by a place that people can go to in order to get loans for their small businesses. And it would make a perfect vehicle to put out, like, democratic worker co-op loans for startup costs. Because yeah, some of those democratic worker co-ops might fail, but their rate of failure is lower than that of for-profit companies. So you're going to have a higher success rate, which means you're going to have more payback, which means you could basically turn this postal banking mechanism into a self-funding apparatus that could then continually give out more loans to like people looking to start up democratic worker co-ops. I think it is a perfectly sensible option to make this a mass, like a mass movement, a mass restructuring, you know? And I think that on the top end, we could adapt Bernie Sanders' proposal from several years ago now, that any company that wants to sell must first offer their company to their workers. Workers should have a first right of refusal for any sale of the company. And similarly, companies that need government bailouts in order to survive should become democratic worker co-ops. Like that bailout should be contingent on those companies becoming democratic co-ops. And I think with those two mechanisms alone, you create a kind of vice that over time is going to create more and more democratic co-ops and bring society to the point where people aren't going to want to choose to work for a private company. Like, in a world where you could choose to work at a company that you part own and have a say in how it's run and are paid more and like why and have more say over your working conditions, why on earth would you go work for a private company? Why on earth would you do that? It's silly. So that being said, I think the pathway to a better world exists. All that remains is for us to actually have the political will to go down that road. Is your guy's contention that rich people are naturally immoral? No, but rich people have in the system of capitalism a tendency to accumulate more wealth, which in turn, in capitalism, that puts profits over people, means that like rich people, generally speaking, are incentivized to do things that take advantage of working class folks. There is an inherent power imbalance here in our system that is only going to be exacerbated by time. And we need to figure out a way to address that imbalance. Capitalism as a system encourages people to break taboos and break laws. It is an economic system geared towards injustice. I'd personally say there's a number somewhere of how much wealth you can have before you are innately immoral. Maybe. I don't know what that is, though. I hear constantly about how we need a general strike. I can't even get people to delete their Meta accounts. Yeah, I mean, like, that's kind of the thing. Like, anytime you see people going, oh, Italy, Italian general strike, why can't we have that here? And it's like, we can't even get you people to, like, vote on one day every 4 years, like let alone a general strike. But like we're working on it. We're working on it. But a general strike requires an immense amount of coordination, and like we just do not have the union culture that Italy has. We used to at one point, but over the course of a century, it's been stripped from us. We haven't built the infrastructure, and a good chunk of American culture is a bit too selfish and short-sighted. I mean, I think the main problem is less the culture and selfishness and the short-sightedness, but I think it's that we don't have the soft infrastructure and we don't have the hard infrastructure. You know, we don't have like the people power. We don't have like the monetary financial strength in order for people to take off work for as long as would be necessary. You know, it's difficult, to say the least. Do I support universal basic income? You know, I was torn on that for a while, mostly because Andrew Yang introduced me to that idea. But like the research I've seen come out about it indicates that universal basic income is generally really great. So I'm not opposed to it. I would want to know more about how it would be implemented and the protections that would be in place to prevent that amount of money from being hoovered up by like landlords. I would want to know more about the protections to prevent that from happening. Which is one of the reasons, by the way, that like I encourage you to be skeptical, especially if there are independent politicians or conservative-leaning politicians who are pushing for a universal basic income. It really, really matters how it is implemented. The money is already being hoovered up by landlords. Well, yeah, exactly.
Riverboat Jack is going to town. All the viewers gather round. Twitch and YouTube is where she streams. All that content is bursting the seams. Politics, dating, plenty more.